in 2010, after I retired as a judge, I opened a new law practice, and I went into a partnership with a woman named Sonda Fields, who I had known since she was a child, being good friends with her father and mother. And she was my law clerk when I was a judge, but without getting too far into Sonda Fields, I met online a woman named Delina Grayling, like a fish, Grayling, and she was had lived the first 30 or 40 years of her life in South Africa. I had obviously split up with my second wife by then, 3 years earlier. Delina I found on a dating service. She was living in Salem, and she was a veteran of the dating service and a charming, bright, strong woman who had a virulent breast cancer and had radiation, which she said gave her brain fog. And so when we started dating, she moved in with me in Portland and brought her mattress from Salem, and she started working with me in the office. And she said she wanted to clear her head of this brain fog, because she had been a highly skilled secretary, executive assistant in a electric power company for several years, and where she could type 300 words a minute. She would sit in meetings and type contemporaneously what people said, and she wanted to get that sharpness back. So I supported her. She lived with me. I paid for all her living expenses and so on, and she volunteered at the office. Well, she told me a lot about her earlier life experiences, and it's relevant to the racism and pro-apartheid that Elon Musk is promoting now in the United States. She was of Dutch cultural descent. She'd never been to the Netherlands, but knowing my Dutch cousins, she was so Dutch, it was hard to believe that she hadn't grown up in Amsterdam, which I really loved. Her cultural values were wonderful. But she'd been married to a man who was a police officer in Johannesburg, and that was a nasty, nasty job, because they were keeping the black people suppressed in villages with very oppressive police conduct, and it scarred him. And eventually, as she grew in her confidence in herself in her late 30s, he became very threatened by that, and eventually one day he completely had a mental breakdown and took a butcher knife and said he was going to cut her throat. Well, fortunately, she was able to lock the door and keep him outside, and she called the police. They came and arrested him, and he spent, I can't remember exactly, but it was at least 30 hard days in jail, maybe longer. And that was the end of the marriage. And her daughter, by the way, was there and witnessed that. And when she came to the United States, she was involved with a man for over a year, who gradually became psychologically abusive. And I think she had one other relationship in the United States, I'm not sure. But what I began to see with her was that she was so used to being suppressed and living with a husband who physically threatened her and was angry and suffering from post-traumatic stress from his job. Then the other thing that sort of clinched the thing for me to give up on trying to marry her was that her son, when she came to the United States, she brought her daughter, but her son stayed behind. He was in school, and he was going to join her soon. But he, for some reason, briefly dropped out of school, and when he did, he was immediately drafted into the army in South Africa and trained and driven into the Bantus, where the black people were being horribly suppressed and required to go around suppressing people, using violence on defenseless people. And this made him very angry, and he blamed his mother for having been left behind and getting exposed to the draft. And she was very hurt by that and felt guilty. But that was more apartheid, the scars and wounds of apartheid. And I gradually concluded that she'd had so much of that in her life that it was just going to be a matter of time until she decided I was doing something that was controlling and abusive, which, for all the fact that my second marriage failed, I was never accused of that by my second wife. But I was very sensitive that I didn't want to get started down that path. So I began pulling back, and when she sensed that, boom, she was out of there. But that's just more experience I've had with apartheid and racism. And I think that we should be alarmed in this country at somebody called Elon Musk taking a lot of power. Now Donald Trump has, quote, cut off all aid to South Africa because he says that the South African government is mistreating some white property owners there. In the meantime, the president of South Africa said, well, we are not violating constitutional law in what we're doing about property. And by the way, other than aid to combat AIDS, the United States isn't giving us hardly any aid anyway. I see in the press now that Trump has gone ahead and eliminated all aid to South Africa. Suppress the black people. It's wrong. We should not tolerate it.